I'm recording in Broome. I'm recording Mr. Herbert Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy came here in 1905. He's Broome's old resident, and he came from Melbourne originally. And when he came here, you came to work as a customs clerk, was it?
On a private firm.
With a private firm. And was Broome very different?
Oh, yes. In those days, pearling was in full swing and building up to its, and building up to its full strength in pearling luggers.
Oh, I see. And did it look different? Was there more bigger population? And
Oh, yes. There was a bigger population than there is now, for the simple reason we had all the pearling crews here. So Broome built up to 350 luggers. There's 7 or 8 men. It all depends whether it's a hand pump boat or an engine boat on each, you see. Well, they're all indentured labourers, mostly Malays, Japanese and Manilamen in those days. Eventually the Japanese got a footing, and they reached a preponderancy in numbers here in the numbers of indentured labourers employed.
Would there have been more Japanese in Broome, say, than Australians at any time, or was there always a...
Most of those were interned and sent over to Adelaide, I think it was.
I see. And when you came here, you worked as a customs clerk in this private firm. Was there a lot of coming and going, a lot of importing and exporting from Broome, was there, by ship?
Oh, yes. All the shell then used to be packed in cases and shipped to London through either one of the banks that were here. And people drew an advance against it, and it was eventually sold at the bi-monthly auctions in London. Later on, dealers came out here, sent their representatives out and bought on the spot, and particularly from America. And then it eventually resulted in the bulk of the output of MOP shell going to the United States, New York or Philadelphia.
What's MOP shell, Mr. Kennedy?
That's mother of pearl.
Oh, I see. Yes, I never thought of that, mother of pearl shell. And what about sort of the life in the town? Well, you wouldn't have gone to school here, of course, but would there have been a sort of a different atmosphere? I mean, all these
entirely different
people?
The atmosphere is entirely different then to what it is today. For this reason, principally, the town then contained a lot of people who had their homes here, raised their families here, and called Broome their home. If they went south, they were going for a trip. Today it's totally different. They go south of there, they're going home. They're only up here for a holiday. The reason was there were so many families here, the breadwinner owned pearling luggers, either 1, 2, or perhaps interested in a fleet. And when you come to work it out, there are 350 luggers here, see, 132 ownerships, and nearly all living in the town. Of course, there were a few big fleets. The biggest fleet was about 20-odd luggers, and they then got less and less, down to some only owned 1 lugger. They used to be called the small pearlers because they only had 1 lugger, you see. And others built up to 3, 4, 5 and half a dozen luggers.
How many did you have? How many did you have?
I had 6 luggers.
Oh.
Eventually. I didn't start with 6.
How did you get into the pearling business?
How did I get into it?
Yeah.
I think I fell into it.
What gave you the push? What tripped you up?
Well, I had no idea of going into pearling, you know, and as a matter of fact, I'm sorry I did, because when I entered pearling, I it happened to be in the period of its most hazardous times. The market, the sale of MOP shell was always unsteady. The beginning of the year would open up at a good price, and you had hopes, that was going to continue. And when you signed your men on, you paid them very high rates to get the best men. Your divers, tenders, crews, engine boys. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. As soon as the shells started to come in, instead of opening at last year's prices, which were encouraging, it opened up very much lower and continued on then till nearly the end of the year. The result was many pearlers were driven out of the industry. They couldn't make a do of it. And
When was that? Would you remember? What year would that have been?
Right up to the beginning of the First World War.
And when did you come into it? What year?
I came here in 1905, of course.
Yeah.
And I went into the industry about 1908.
Oh. And did it need much capital? Did you need a lot of money to go in those days?
No. In those days, we went to it first of all with what they call hand pump boats. The air sent down to the diver by pumps operated by men on board with what they called a hand pump. Later on, they got engine equipped, and of course they cost a few money. The engines, I forget what they call them again now. The engines cost about, in those days, somewhere about £500 or £600, not dollars, pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they increased the take of shell per lugger. The hand pump boats of a diver in those days, just with the manual labour on board, got 6 ton of shell. He was, amongst the top notches.
Oh, I see.
But eventually, when the engines came in, the engines and compressors, they could work 2 divers on the boat, not necessarily down at once. Very seldom they went down at once, but as soon as the other came up, the other went down, see? Whereas with the hand pump boats, and when they only had 1 diver, he took a long time, like coming up. For argument's sake, it all depends on the depth of the water. If they went down in very shallow water, they could come up fairly quickly. But if they were down in deep water, they had to stage. See, sometimes they'd be down to the water, say for half an hour, and it'd take them 2 hours to come up if they're in deep water. Otherwise, if they came up too quickly, we found, the pearlers found out to their dire cost, the nitrogen that got into the blood at depths couldn't escape. The result is clots formed in the blood and probably ended a diver's career. Very often ended in death.
Is that what they call the bends? Is that what they call the bends?
Well, the bends were an attack of
Paralysis.
Well, yes, a mild attack of paralysis, which may have developed later on. See.
Mm.
Well, the result was that a lot of these divers at that time, once they got afflicted like that, in some instances it meant death, or in other cases the end of their diving career.
What happened to them then? Did they go back to Japan?
Well, we used to send them back in the early days, but when the Japanese came here, they had different ideas to that. They insisted on the pearlers sending a certain amount of money there for his keep, £300, I think, we had to, when a diver was paralysed and had to go back to Singapore.
What year was it that you went into the industry again? About 3 years after you got here.
1909, I think it was.
And was it easy to get sort of finance? I mean, with the bank finance you in those days, like they do the stations today, or do they? Was it too risky?
We used to have to look to the bank for a certain amount of finance, That the private firms here used to finance most of the permits. And then the shell had to go through them, see? They made their commissions both ways.
What would be shops and that sort of thing, would they, or local?
Oh, there were only a couple of them. Two big firms, Robinson and Norman, Street and Mail. Usually Street and Co in those days. And
they used to finance the pearl.
Oh, yes. Well, it gradually built up, from a few luggers, gradually built up by the outbreak of war. We had 350 luggers. We had 2,200 indentured labourers in the industry, and about 500 or 600 others that were here before the introduction of the Immigration Restriction Act. You know what that is, then?
Yes, that's a bit like we have had in the East for our gold fields.
Well, before the introduction of that act, you could go and bring men in from Singapore here without any... and they could stay here, live here. But when that act came in, you could only bring them in under indenture. The result was, when their time was up, they had to go back unless they re-signed to the same master or another master.
Now, something interests me. I was talking to a chap down at Onslow. You might know him. His name's Pat Armat. Armat, he's the harbour and lights, the wharfinger at Onslow. He's a Japanese Malayan.
What name?
Armat, A-H-M-A-T, I think. I think his father had a store down there. But his father came here as an indentured labourer to the pearling industry, indentured worker. And then when he was finished, he went down there and opened up a store. Now, how would he have got away with that?
Well, I told you that. Until the introduction of the Immigration Restriction Act, they were free to do what they liked.
Oh, I see. That means he must have come in before the immigration.
Before that. I think that came in about 1903.
Oh, yes, he was in the 1890s. That's right. Yes, I see. Yes. And so that would be a lot of the descendants living here would have come in before then.
That's why we've got a lot of coloured men owning shops here today, you see. They're descendants, of the people
who came in
that
then.
Were freed in those early days.
I see. Oh, yes, I just wondered that because I couldn't understand there were so many Japanese down at Geraldton and this sort of thing, and they probably came here.
Yes, well, they were free to go anywhere.
I see.
In those days.
Yes. Yes, I get you. And what was I going to say? Well, then, would you and most of the other pearling masters, is that what you called yourselves? Pearling masters, was it? Or pearling lugger-owners, or what?
Pearling masters.
Pearling masters, were they?
We just called them lugger-owners, we used to call them.
Lugger-owners, did you?
And as a matter of fact, we generally had the wrong end of the stick.
Did you?
If you weren't on board yourself, you had to either employ a shell opener, or else depend on a member of the crew to do the opening of the shell to get any pearls.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it's unnecessary to say the pearl has got a very small percentage of what pearls were fished.
Like the owners of diamond mines.
I know this. It was approved after. A certain individual in Broome, no need to mention his name, was hawking a shell of mine that he valued at £1,100, and I never saw it.
What was it?
A pearl.
A pearl?
A pearl.
Of yours?
Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Every pearl here that probably lost several pearls on his boat in this career. See, I know, that's the only one that I know definitely of, and I never got a penny of the £1,100.
And what would happen to them? Would they be sold on the black market and sent overseas or something like that?
Oh, there was no trouble about that at all. The licensed pearl dealers here were just as bad as anybody else in those days.
Who were they? Mostly white men?
I'll tell you why. If I took my own pearl along, you see, I'd probably want its value, or what I thought was its value.
Yeah.
But the chap that, took ownership of it, see, without my knowledge, he was quite satisfied to get probably a third of that price. You see, his commission was 10%. Say a pearl was worth £1,000. He'd get £100 commission, 10%. So. But that's in addition to the wages he used to get.
Yeah.
Well,
Who would? The opener? The opener got it.
the opener,
I
yes.
see.
We always used to call them the openers.
Yes.
And he'd get 10% on that. So see, well, if it was worth £1,000, he'd get £100. See, well, he'd have no trouble getting £300 or £400 for it round the town. Well, you only got to just judge human nature. These people.
And would many of them get caught?
Oh, there were one or two cases, but very prolonged and very hard to prove. And
Yes, I suppose one pearl looks very much like another in many ways. That's all. Anyway, if no one had ever seen it, but yeah.
it's very hard to prove because
Yes.
it seemed to be a sort of religion with all those in the trade. They never split on one another. They'd never admit they bought a pearl off this man or that man.
I see. I suppose if they did, then other people wouldn't sell to them anyway. If they started dobbing them in, if they'd said that.
Yes, but very often the man that got hold of a pearl, under the wrap, we'll say, he generally brought in a third man to do all the business, so he wouldn't appear in it at all. See? Because if anything did come up, they'd have to trace where the pearl started off from first, and then it could never be proved that he sold it, if they found he had it.
Yes, I see.
He could turn around and say it was stolen from him.
I see. And would most of your profits have come from the pearls or the shell?
Oh no, the shell was always a staple.
Was it?
Staple, I mean.
Yeah.
Always a staple.
The pearls were just a little bit extra sort of thing.
Well, they were the hazard rate, we'll put it that way. Like if you went on a race course.
They were the gamble. And did the pearl shell, before we get off that, the pearl openers, were they, the pearl buyers, were they mostly Australians or were they Asians or?
Oh, in the early days, they were overseas.
Yes, I see.
Well, at the outbreak of the war, we'll put it this way, there were 13 shell buyers in Broome.
The last war.
Yeah, no, the first war.
First war, yeah.
At the outbreak of the first war, that was in 1913, we'll say, it started in 1914. And the war broke out. Well, after the first boat left there for Singapore, there was one left.
One.
And they all went.
They went. They shot
all
through.
the fleets laid up, the luggers laid up, and all that sort of thing. The market fell out, but you couldn't sell anything. You couldn't sell pearl, you couldn't sell anything at all. So.
Going
sell your shell.
Yeah, so going back to your early days in the industry, did you, when you went into it, did you expand your fleet pretty quickly, or did it take you a good while? Did you go out yourself on your first boat?
Never. I went out on a schooner just for a joyride. That's all.
And you could run it efficiently.
I wouldn't have lived the life there if I was going to get a packet of diamonds for it.
What was it like?
Oh, very hard life. And
how long would they stay out?
Well, it all depended. You see, if you had one boat or something, he may have, there'd been provision from a schooner out there, you see. See, there were a couple of individuals ran a schooner out there. See, I used to be agent for a couple of them, and we'd take stores out and all that sort of thing and send it to luggers and keep them out longer. Otherwise, they'd have to come into Broome to replenish. And
they stay out weeks at a time, or months, or?
Oh, some of them there wouldn't. They'd be out there for 6 months.
And what sort of food would they eat? Fish and things?
Rice and onions, potatoes, tinned meat, tinned fish. Sometimes they change from the fish they caught. That's all. Like salmon and something else.
Yes.
of course, plenty of vegetables. I said
see.
potatoes and onions, didn't I?
Yes. Were you actually pearling at the time of the Broome riot? Remember the Broome riot? Was it 1910, wasn't it?
920.
Oh, well, yes, you were still well in it then, yes. That was quite after. And then, I see, and the life was pretty rough.
Outside,
Yes.
well, it was very, it was rough, but it was very, what would you call it, uncomfortable there for the white owner. He was the only white man on. How they put up with it, I don't know. I never tried it because when I went out on a schooner.
Yeah.
And
I see. And you had a captain on board, did you, in charge, or like a captain in
the
charge?
driver was always in charge.
Was he?
Mm.
I see. And he
may not have been the best seaman on board, but he was always in charge. But he never interfered with the tender, who really controlled the sailing of the boat. We looked at on the tender as the man responsible for the safety of the boat. The tender, that's the man that looked after the lifeline and the diving hose down to the diver when it was down to the bottom.
And how far out did they go?
Oh, sometimes it all depended on the lay of the coast, you see, and whether they were deep water men or shallow water men.
Oh, there were different men for different jobs.
Oh, yes. When you signed on your divers, you knew whether he could go into deep water or only shallow water. And it all depended then how far they went out to sea. The deep water men, there were more casualties out there amongst the deep water men than they were with the shallow water men.
Well, how deep is deep water?
Somewhere about 15 to 20 fathoms.
Oh, that is deep.
Now and again they went a bit over 20 fathoms, but they always looked upon that as a bit hazardous.
Yes, I see.
See, the shallow water was only anything up to 7 or 8 fathoms.
Oh, I see. Would you like to switch off while you drink your beer?
No, it was actually the Builders Association.
It was at the time of the Broome riot in
I had to write
1920.
reports of it, and as a matter of fact, I sent a long screed down to the West Australian. They telegraphed and asked me to give them all the facts as far as I possibly could. See, and I've got a copy of the
article.
See it somewhere on a file here, and I forget exactly where it is now. So I sent it all down there, press rates. They paid for it. And
I know about press rates.
they printed the whole lot, everything. Well, it all started out there during 1 year. The Japanese increased their numbers, and they were in the preponderance, of divers, tenders, engine boys, but not crew. They had to engage on the day owners had to engage, for purposes of costs of running the fleet, the cheapest crew they could get, because they were paying high wages for the skilled men.
Was it a high profit industry?
No,
It was.
it was not. It was not a high profit industry. The only ones that made were the shell buyers in America, and mostly in America. They bought and then sold the shell to button manufacturers and all that sort of thing.
Considering the risks, it wasn't a very big profit.
Well, but just before I get any further, we better cut that off.
Was it going down?
No, look, I'll just tell you what this is. It was not a bad runner, but not as good as he thought he was.
Go on. Yeah.
Not as bad as he thought he was.
Yeah.
See? As good as he thought he was. So anyhow, we decided to encourage him and tell him what a good runner he was, and how we're going to back him heavily for the the races. In those days we used to have sports meeting here every end of the year. We don't have them now. Got no curling luggers. I tell you, they were well. We used to have 100-yard race. What they call them again? 100-yard races.
Sprint.
Eh?
A sprint.
Well, what
sprint,
is
yeah.
sprint, I suppose.
Yeah.
Quarter mile, half mile. And all of that. Then we used to have a few races for the ladies too, and all that sort of thing. I tell you, it was a big event here.
When was this?
Oh, this was before the First War.
Oh, I see.
So I'm just trying to explain, you
Yeah.
know, how it all came about.
Yeah.
So we had one chap there. A few of the heads got together, you know, and got him. You know, the trick of the trade, you know. They had a couple of good runners here, and well, mind you, there were a lot of them, you know, for the, well, what they call it again, I forget that main race. Anyhow, I know there was a quarter mile and 100 yards, 100 yards it was. Oh, I think it was by and by. Anyhow, there was great competition. And it's just like horse stables down south here. A little crowd had their runner, train him and one thing and another. But there's one crowd there, they wanted somebody to be a pace setter, you know, for the man that they were going to back. You know what I mean, don't you?
Yeah, someone to get him going.
Yeah, well, you know, race alongside him, all out.
Mm.
So they got hold of this poor little chap, Charlie, and made him believe they were training him to win the race. Well, to be honestly, you'd be surprised. The poor chap, you know, he took it so seriously, put his heart and soul into it. Well, of course, you know, they had to pass it on to jokes too at the finish. There was a place down there we all used to live in, about 10 of us, and we had a Chinese cook, you see. Had our own. We didn't like going to the pubs, you know, and of course we'd have him down there. Well, all right. We'd bring him in. And we had a chap there, you know, supposed to be the man in charge, you know, that examine him and see him all right, you know. They had Charlie there now. Well, they'd have him standing on the wall there. Well, you look, Charlie, he'd examine and say, look, Charlie, you're feeling a bit heavy underneath. Too much under, what do you call it? Undergrowth.
Undergrowth.
I don't think that's the word. Too much. No, there's another word for it. You know, they reckon he was too heavy underneath. They had a sandpaper in.
Oh.
The poor devil there. All right, they'd go and they'd sandpaper him, you know, and then they get him to sand in hot water while they're having their meals. Now, change your leg, Charlie. All right, he'd take the other leg and stand up against the battles. Oh, Lord. Look, I got no idea the jokes they used to get up in those days. And he didn't mind because you feel like a beer, Charlie? Yes, I wouldn't mind. He'd have a beer. He got all the beer he wanted. They treated him well, you know, and all gave him a few bottles. He never had a better life. He just lived with his mother, you know, and she was an old stager.
Was he a bit simple, was he?
Eh?
Was he a bit simple? Or
Oh, yes, simple as one thing.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. He used to work on the wharf and do other jobs. And payday, up here in those days, they all used to pay in sovereigns.
Did they?
Oh, my word. If you went into a bank and changed a cheque, unless you asked for notes, you'd get sovereigns. That's actually...
This was up to the First World War.
It's only when they went off the gold standard, see, that they changed that. All got sovereigns. Well, that was all right. You didn't always want sovereigns, you see. And, some people wanted notes, see. So, anyhow, poor old Charlie there. He, no, I got off the damn thing trying to explain that now.
They were trying to train him for, they were having him as a pacemaker, weren't they, for the other bloke?
Let's see now. They had him standing in water. I got that far, see. I can't think why I went off onto that gold business. I think it was just to explain something, wasn't it?
Were they paying him in sovereigns, or he said he was
Well,
going to be?
nearly always got paid in
Yeah,
sovereigns
yeah.
in those days. As I say, if you went into a bank to change a cheque, they'd give you some order. Do you want to give me notes?
Mm.
Eh?
Mm.
Oh, and they looked at you now.
Mm.
You see, I don't know what it was then. The bank never had control of their own notes or something then, I think. I forget what it was, but anyhow, when they went off the bank stand, the things were ordered straight away. You had to pay to get gold sovereigns later on.
Did you?
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I used to send crews over, that had finished their time here. We had to send them back to Kopang by a schooner.
Mm.
We had to send all their balance of their wages, over.
To whom?
Over to our agent.
Oh, yeah.
Pay them off before the controleurs, they called him, the shipping master in Kopang.
I see.
And we were supposed to send back a third of their wages. Some of the poor beggars went back with none.
Why is that?
Because they spent it all here. They drew it all here, you see.
Did you feed them? Did they get their feed and keep? Was that part, or did they get their what? Was that taken out of their wages?
Oh, we sent them over on a schooner. They had to be fit to get over
No,
there.
but I mean when they were out pearling, like that was.
Oh, yes.
They got food, like pay and keep, sort of.
Well, they were signed on it like they are on a
Yeah,
steamer
I
today.
see, yeah.
Well, we say 2 years, but I think the first place was 3 years. But I had an agent in Kopang, and I recruited most of the crews that came over here, or had recruited, you see. I was the agent, and I got my fee for it. A nice little business in those days for me, too, and then sent them back to him. And their wages had to go back, and there was no way they wouldn't take Australian paper money over there. We had to send gold over, you see. Well, it was all right at the start. We could go and get all the gold we wanted. There was no trouble. But when they went off the gold standards or some other damn thing, first of all, you paid sixpence a sovereign. And then it went up, you had to pay 2 bob to get a sovereign to send over to Kopang.